Hey folks, this is a video I've been trying to get to for quite a while now, but to be honest I kept putting it off because, oh yeah, there's just one more kit, let me just get this kit and then I can compare them all. But at this point it seems like, every time I wait for a kit there's another two that have just been announced and haven't really come out yet. So I will put those other ones on hold for a future video and just talk about what we have right now. At the moment there are, I don't know, like 6 different Game Boy Color backlight kits. There's the original AGS 101 mod, or the ElClono. There's the 2017 Taobao mod, Freckleshack, McWill, Midwest Embedded, and this new AliExpress kit, the one that just came out pretty recently. It has that touch sensor. I don't really know what else to call it. I'm still looking for a good name on that one. I'm leaning towards CDI, but we'll come back to that. So what I'm gonna do, I want to talk about each kit a little bit in depth, some of the biggest pros, some of the biggest cons, and then just overall, do I think this is a good kit? But before I really get into it, I want to answer 2 questions really. Of all my Game Boy Colors, if I had to get rid of all of them but one, the one I would keep is the 2017 Taobao mod. I like this one the most, and I'll get more into that in a minute, but it's just if I had to get rid of all of them but one, that's the one I would keep. However, if you do not already have any backlit Game Boy Colors, you're looking to pick up your first one, I would definitely recommend getting the Freckleshack. Again, I'll get to that in a minute, but I just feel like that's the best bang for your buck right there. So, that being said, I'm going to talk about each kit, give some pros, give some cons, and then just sum it up basically. First up here, I have the ElClono, or the AGS 101 Game Boy Color. This kit is notable for a couple different reasons, mostly because I've personalized mine so heavily, but we'll circle back to that. The biggest claim to fame this kit has is that it's basically the first good backlight kit for the Game Boy Color. There were other methods of backlighting your Game Boy Color before this, but to be frank, they completely sucked, and you were better off installing a front light kit, which should say a lot because front light kits are garbage in 2019, and the last good front light kit was the Afterburner kit. Other than that, your only good source are like dead AGS 001 units or the front light Game Boy Advance SP. You can pull panels from those and you can get some decent results with those, but it's difficult and it rarely works out well. This is pretty much the first decent backlight kit. That being said, backlight kits are pretty pricey, so if you want to light your Game Boy Color, the absolute cheapest method is still going to be a front light. But like I said, they're not so great unless you're exceptionally good at it or you source a good kit. When it comes to modding these Game Boy Colors, generally you get what you pay for. There are some diminishing returns, however. That out of the way, this kit, the biggest pros I would say is that it has probably the most accurate colors as far as any other kit out there. Reason the first is that it's technically original Game Boy hardware. The games themselves were designed to run on this screen. Well, not specifically this screen, but this screen was designed to run these games, so on and so forth, because it is out of a Game Boy Advance SP, whereas other screens, they're built using slightly different technology that might not represent the colors as well. Specifically, some of them have trouble with black levels, but I'll get to that in a second. Another reason this kit is pretty nice is that the screens themselves are pretty easy to get your hands on. Granted, they've been getting quite a bit more expensive over the last few months, or I guess year at this point. Rumor mill is that China had made a new batch of these screens, but that batch is running out, and unless someone wants to pay for 10,000 up front, they're not making any more. And so as supply goes down, of course the price goes up. Again, you put this kit next to a front light kit, it looks so much better. So, those are the pros. The cons, on the other hand, I've got quite a list here. So this screen has a smaller display because it has a slightly higher DPI. So if you look at the width of the original Game Boy Color screen, you'll see it's about 43 millimeters, give or take. It's kind of hard to measure through the lens, but whenever I measure, I consistently get about 43, and that's what other people get too, so we'll call it 43. This kit, on the other hand, is about 39 millimeters wide, So you lose about 2 millimeters on each side, and the aspect ratio is the same, so you're losing about the same on the top as well. So you are going to notice, because your bezels are going to be bigger, going to be paying for a custom lens if you want to keep the screen borders hidden. Another con with this kit is this requires very extensive shell modification. Now, I'm not talking, oh, you need to cut out some walls here and there. I mean, you literally need to mill out the whole front half of your shell. Then you need to trim down your screws and glue in some 3D printed brackets. Then you need to remove the power LED on your Game Boy Color and either reroute it with like a 0603 surface mount LED or just omit it entirely. There's a crazy amount of modification. Oh yeah, and you lose the power switch detent. So you know how when you click it on and off, it no longer clicks, it just slides freely. I specifically had quite a few problems with this because it meant that my Game Boy Color was turning on when it shouldn't be. So, you know, I'd put it in my bag, go to work, lunchtime comes around, I want to play it, battery's already freaking dead because I left it on all night by accident. Back to the smaller display, you kind of need to mask the screen, unless you're one of the lucky few. I say lucky, but if I recall correctly, that kit didn't actually work out too well. But if you got your hands on one of the Ben 3.0 ribbons, you didn't actually have to mask your screen. But if you weren't one of those lucky folks who got yourself a 3.0 kit, the edges of your screen are all white. That's fine in practice for a lot of games. It doesn't make your display look as small as it is, but the display doesn't stay white. I don't know if this is a problem with my kit in particular or if all kits do this. I haven't seen anyone else mention this, but the white area underneath the screen specifically, not necessarily on top or on the sides, but specifically on the bottom, the pixels will start changing color over time, almost like it's like the FPGA is just dumping garbage data there or something, or it's not constantly updating the pixels, so it's not constantly telling the pixels, you know, stay white. They're just changing color because that's what it does over time when they're receiving no data. So you might want to mask your kit, and to be honest, it's kind of difficult to mask your kit perfectly. If you don't get your masking right on the pixel line, it's going to look like there's a red or a green line running down the side because you're cutting off half a pixel. Because don't forget, to display a white pixel, the red, the green, and the blue component need to be all lit up at the same time. So unless you perfectly cover up that exact pixel, you know, if you bisect a pixel, you're only going to be seeing the green or the blue or the red portion of that pixel, and it's going to look like there's a colored line. That's what happened with my kit here. You can get a custom lens, and that'll help mitigate some of the masking. In fact, if you get a custom lens, you might not want to mask. You'll still see that white border, but kinda no way around it, at least nothing that I've found. Another issue with this kit is that it is very power hungry. I haven't exactly measured my battery life, and it doesn't matter too much because my kit in particular is converted over to a rechargeable battery, so my battery life is going to be different from any other kit anyway, just based off of my battery alone. Another thing is that the blacks, I said it's better than some of the other kits, but it's still kind of garbage compared to some modern LCDs. Don't forget, just because this is a backlit Game Boy and it's better than all those other Game Boys that came before it, this is still 15 plus year old tech. The AGS 101 display, that was great back in the day because all the alternatives didn't have any lights whatsoever, but compared to a modern LCD, put it up next to your smartphone and you'll be able to tell, not even counting the pixel density, colors, blacks, everything, just overall it's garbage. It's still better than nothing, but it's not acceptable in 2019, at least for a new product. Thankfully this isn't a new product, but I digress. All that being said, one of the coolest accessories to this mod is that you can get machined aluminum shell for your Game Boy. And if you are not in a position to do your own machining to make the screen fit, I think it's pretty much the only option. You can order pre-cut shells, but it's just a little bit more to get one of the aluminum ones, and it makes the mod so much easier. Everything goes together so much better, and you know, you get a really unique product with it. I highly recommend it if you're doing this mod, and especially if you do not have the means to cut your own shell. Unfortunately, it does require converting over to a rechargeable. You can't just use your AA's, but I mean, that's either a pro or a con depending on who you talk to, so that's neither here nor there. You have some other options too. You can get just a plain coating, you can get anodized aluminum for some cool colors, Or hell, you can do something like what I did. I got mine Cerakoted. It's aluminum, so you could also do powder coating. Yeah, it's not the cheapest thing, but it's another option that we didn't have before. And finally, it makes your Game Boy super heavy, which either a pro or a con, depending on who you talk to. But personally, I like it, unless it's not my everyday carry Game Boy. But it has a certain heft to it that makes it feel special, and I think it's pretty cool that way. Case options aside, I still think this is the most accurate display if you're after the most authentic experience, and not just, the best experience, but the most authentic. Yeah, this is probably the most accurate display. It's pixel perfect. At the very least, there's no scaling or blurring, and but despite all that, compared to modern kits, I think this is probably your worst choice if you're looking to build a new Game Boy Color. If you already have the parts, might as well finish your build, but if you don't have the parts, don't purchase them to build this kit. This is not good use of your time or your money. There are much cheaper kits that offer higher quality, that are easier to build, just work better overall. If the opportunity came up, I would not pick up another one of these. I think this is the last AGS 101 backlit Game Boy Color I will ever own. I might build another one for a friend, but basically only if they already had the parts. So let's move on now to the AliExpress kit. I still don't really have a name for this kit. I've had a few suggestions, and it was suggested acronym CDI. They were suggesting Chinese drop-in. I'm thinking I like CDI, but not necessarily Chinese drop-in. Let's call it a complete drop-in screen kit. So CDI screen kit. Again, this is that AliExpress kit with the touch sensor that came out, I don't know, like a month ago or so. Probably not even. This is still not, and never has been, a Freckleshack clone. If you're thinking back to that Facebook post you saw from Ben Ven, there is a Freckleshack clone. This is not it. Let's move on to the good things about this kit. Biggest pro I think that this kit has is the price. It is, as of right now, July 14th, the cheapest kit out of all of them so far. I paid about $55 shipped on AliExpress. You can get it, I think it's even going for a little bit cheaper now too. You can get it for, last I checked, about $36 on Taobao, but that's before shipping. And depending on where you're shipping to, you might even need to use an agent, which will add an extra fee, so on and so forth. You can also get this kit through the Funny Playing site, which, if you're familiar with their recent Game Boy Advance Backlight kit, well, same site. It's about $55 shipped there. Freckleshack starts at, I think, like $60, and that's before shipping, which Ben Ven is notorious for not having cheap shipping, but, it's all registered and it's insured, so whatever. That's neither here nor there. We'll leave that for another time. So far, it is the cheapest kit until something else comes along. So, like the next few kits, this uses a transflective display. Now, what that means is that it does have a backlight, like the AGS 101 mod, but it also has a reflector installed in front of the backlight, so that you could turn off the backlight entirely and use it like the original Game Boy Color screen. Of course, because it's slightly translucent, which is where the name comes from, it's translucent reflector, transflector, it does let some light through. So if you're using it like a traditional Game Boy Color with the backlight off, it is going to be a little bit darker. That being said, this is still a pretty decent kit. It has some really nice colors, but because it's transflective, the blacks aren't really as black as they could be. But, again, on the other hand, you get perfect visibility in direct sunlight. So, if you use your kit outside a lot, that's definitely something to consider. Another very big pro, and this is the only kit that I'm going to be discussing today. The only kit that has this. There's zero cutting involved. There's zero shell modification. You don't have to touch a single thing on your shell. All you have to do, literally open up your Game Boy Color, remove the old screen, pop this in. That's it. Another thing, this kit has absolutely zero soldering. Now, the most recent revision of ElClono does have zero soldering if you don't care for the brightness control. This kit has zero soldering, just period. And you have brightness control. You don't even have to solder for that. It comes with a cool little touch sensor that looks like it's intended to go in the IR window, and you just, once you have it installed, you tap the IR window and it'll change your brightness for you, and it'll just cycle through all the different steps. Zero soldering, zero cutting. This kit is truly, seriously drop in. So that leads me back to the brightness control. Unfortunately, it's the type that I don't like, where you just cycle through the steps. There's no real control over it. However, two saving graces really. Each tap or each touch or each trigger changes the cycle once, and then that's it. You have to release and then trigger it again to change it. That gives you a little bit more control. I like that, but it would be even better in my opinion if you could, tap up to go up or tap down to go down, if there are like 2 sensors or something, but I guess that's something for another time. Another cool feature that this kit does come with, if you are up to soldering, you can hook this up to buttons like a regular kit. You have 2 solder points, a hold and then a plus minus. So for example, you solder up the hold to select and then the plus minus button to volume down. Then you would hold the select button, and then every time you hit the down key, it'll cycle through the brightness settings. And there are 5 brightness settings, one of them being off, which is actually pretty cool for saving some battery life. Which leads me to the next point. Power usage on this kit is actually pretty decent. It's not the best, but it's certainly not the worst. You're gonna notice, like if you were getting 20 hours out of your previous batteries with this kit, you're gonna get less than half that. But that being said, it's not like 2 or 3 hours. It's gonna be like 10, maybe even 11, depending on the brightness setting. Your mileage may vary. Some kits or some Game Boy Colors themselves are a little bit different. And then my last 2 great features that I'm noticing here. This kit in particular does have an adapter so you can use it with the aluminum shell. If you feel like upgrading your old Game Boy Color, or if you're building a new one and you really want aluminum, there is an adapter. You can get it from Boxy Pixel or you can print it out yourself. And finally, if you're not feeling aluminum and you are using it in a clear shell like I am, this is also the only other kit that has no visible external mods. So you don't see, a little curly ribbon cable or an uninteresting PCB. It looks like a stock Game Boy till you turn it on. That's it. So that being said, with that list of pros, there's got to be some cons, right? Well, yeah, the biggest offender, I think, is that this thing drops frames like nobody's business. This comes from the fact that the screen itself is running at about 60 frames per second, whereas a Game Boy Color stock from the factory, it's designed this way, runs games at 59.7 frames per second. So the 2 frame rates aren't really compatible. Every few milliseconds a frame has to be dropped so that the display image and the image that the Game Boy Color is sending, so that those 2 can be synced up. I think it's pretty noticeable. I didn't even have to look for it to start noticing it, at least at first. I do have to say, once you're playing with it for a while, it's not that noticeable depending on the type of game you're playing, but it's pretty similar to the Funny Playing IPS display. It's more noticeable depending on the game, and so if you're using this thing for Pokemon, you're going to notice every single time you're walking around in the overworld. If you're using this for Legend of Zelda, maybe, not so much. I don't know, I can test out some more games, but Pokemon in particular was the worst offender that I noticed. Next up, the default brightness, it's a bit low, I think. It's not unusable, especially because it's a transflective display, so you get a lot out of it regardless of how you're using it, but if you don't install the sensor, the default brightness is, it leaves something to be desired, I think. Next up, the max brightness itself, even if you do install the sensor, kit quite frankly just does not get that bright. Of all of my kits, I think it's about the darkest. It has the lowest max setting. Even among those that don't have adjustable brightness, it's still lower. However, on the other hand, because it is kind of lower on the range there, if you're playing this thing dead of night or sitting up in bed, it's going to be a little bit easier on the eyes because it's not as bright. Like the other transflective units, it still has that same smaller display. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of way around that, at least not yet. By default, the brightness control does require disabling the IR function of the Game Boy. However, on mine, I have been playing with it a little bit. I did put the sensor right about at the top next to the IR sensor, right about the middle of the Game Boy, and it does seem to work fine through that. So maybe play around with it. You don't have to disable the IR functionality. It's probably going to work the best there and be the most reliable, but it still does work through the thick plastic. Ideally, I'd like to put it underneath the screen lens itself, right under the middle, so you just reach up and tap right there and it would work for you. That would require a little bit more modding than I felt like doing, and you'd have to start cutting up your shell. At least for the best results, you'd have to start cutting up your shell, and I wasn't really feeling up to cutting up my limited edition console here, but I suppose you could just cut a hole straight in it and then apply the sensor straight to the lens. It'd probably work great, and you wouldn't even be able to tell once everything's all put together. Like, it would be pretty much invisible. Next up, I don't think this is just my kit because I have seen a couple other people mention this, but I did notice some backlight bleeding that the other kits based off the same screen do not have. It looks like that is due to the fact that they removed the original metal frame around the screen. For whatever reason, I don't know, I can only speculate. Maybe it was just to make the kit a little bit smaller, make it fit a little bit better, but I don't know. Personally, I think removing it was a mistake, because now you get some backlight bleed that you can only eliminate either by masking your screen off or by replacing your stock lens with a custom lens. So another thing here, I guess this is more of a nitpick than a con, but this kit does use a custom ribbon cable, which I can only imagine leads to increasing the cost of the kit. Something like Freckleshack or even the 2017 Taobao mod that just uses off-the-shelf parts, which granted they don't look as good, but I'm sure it made the kits a little bit cheaper, which in the end makes it a little bit cheaper to buy. Another thing regarding this ribbon cable is, for whatever the hell reason, I don't know if it's just too thick or what, but it's really stiff. It honestly feels like you're going to break the unit just bending it to get it to install. And you have to bend it, otherwise your screen is backwards and won't physically fit where it needs to go. So I don't know what's going on with it. I don't like it. I guess it's fine, but I don't like it. Finally, I suppose this is kind of another nitpick, not necessarily a con. Other kits are centered either by the PCB itself fitting into the shell, or for example, Freckleshack comes with 3D printed spacers that you use to make sure the LCD is straight and center within the shell. This kit has neither. If you already have Freckleshack, you can use your spacers from that, and then once you've got the screen centered and in the spot where you like it, you can tape it down and it won't move. But I don't know, it's one of the little things that you won't really notice till you're installing it. Then it's going to drive you crazy because you won't be able to get it right and you're going to have to take it apart 800 million times. Like I said, you can use the spacers from Freckleshack if you have them. If not, if you have a 3D printer or a buddy who does have a 3D printer, I did make and post some STLs there that you can print and use as spacers, but failing that, you can cut some out from like scrap pieces of wood or something. You just need a 6.1 millimeter spacer and then a 3.6 millimeter spacer, and that'll get your screen just about centered. It might be easier to use a 6 millimeter and then 3.5 millimeter just to give you a little bit of wiggle room. Otherwise, it's going to be real tight. So, despite all that, in summary, unfortunately, just due to some timing from a comment from Ben, this kit just has a super bad reputation that I really don't think it deserves. This keeps coming up, so I'm going to have to keep bringing it up. People think this is a clone. This is not a clone. There is a clone. This is not it. This kit is as much a clone of Freckleshack as the Midwest Embedded kit or McWill. It's still not a clone. Uses different FPGA, has a completely different PCB, it even has different features. It's a very usable kit, not a clone. Now that that's out of the way, I think this kit is probably your best bet if you're modifying a limited edition or other rare console, because you don't have to cut, you don't have to solder, you just drop it in. You know, maybe you can preserve the value a little bit better. If you ever do want to sell it, you can swap it back or whatever. That's up to you. I personally would not pick up another one of these for modifying a console, because despite the price, you know, it is still a few bucks cheaper than Freckleshack. I don't think that the frame dropping issue is worth the few dollars that you save. Granted, if you're doing like a one-of-a-kind console that you don't want to cut up, yeah, maybe, but for anything else, absolutely not. So next up, I feel I have to give an honorable mention to the Midwest Embedded kit. Personally, I haven't been able to pick one up. It seems like for the first week they were in stock, you could pick one up, but after that they went out of stock. I haven't seen them come back, and I've been checking, 3 or 4 times a week. Haven't seen them in stock once. I know you can sign up for their mailing list, and that'll probably give you a heads up on when they're coming. But my biggest problem with this kit is that you can't really get one right now. That being said, I still have compiled some information on it, and I'll discuss what I've found, but just take it with a grain of salt. I don't actually have one of these kits, so this information might not be entirely accurate. I did run it by a couple owners, and they said it was good, but you know how it is. First up, the pro, I think, is that it has the exact same transflective display as the previous kit and as Freckleshack and McWill, so you get that sunlight visibility, you get the decent colors, you get that linear scaling, but it does also have some pretty crummy blacks. Another cool thing that this kit has that at the time, it was the only kit to have full brightness control. So what that means is you have 3 points to solder up. You have a hold button which toggles the brightness control, and then an up and a down. And of course you could do whatever 3 buttons you want, but typically that's select, up, and down, so that you can hold select and then you just press up to increase the brightness or down to decrease the brightness. And at the time, since this was the only kit with brightness control, it was the only one that you could actually turn the backlight off without modifying the kit itself. And I think that's pretty cool because that will help you save some battery life. Plus, you know, it is transflective. You can use it out in direct sunlight. Backlight doesn't do shit when you have it out in direct sunlight. Might as well turn it off, you know, save a little bit of power. Another cool thing about this kit is that it is self-centering. There is a template provided because you do need to make some cuts in the console housing itself, but as long as you make all your cuts in line with that template, it'll center itself. You don't need any brackets or anything. It just works. Another unique little oddity is that the screen itself is already masked off. There's no need to mask it off yourself. You don't have to use a custom lens with it. I mean, I'd still probably recommend it, but of all the kits that have a smaller display window, this kit is the least likely to need a lens to look good. It does self-center within the bezel itself instead of within the front housing. The screen is placed right up against the front glass, or plastic, I guess, depending if you're using the stock lens. This has two obvious effects, and I think the pro outweighs the con here. The pro is that it puts the screen right up into the glass. Other kits have the screen behind the bezel. This kit has the screen in the bezel. If you take a look at your smartphone or any other modern touchscreen device, there's two layers there. There's the touch screen itself, which is a layer of glass or plastic, and then underneath that is the LCD. If you have a relatively recent device, your screen is probably laminated to the glass, and it's right up top. Now, this gives you the benefit, makes the colors a little bit clearer. I don't know, it's kind of hard to describe. Take a look at this. So, I have my Switch here. Of course, the screen is great, fine, dandy, whatever. But this is the most modern device I have that the screen is not laminated to the glass. There's a bit of an air gap. And you can kind of see, I guess just like a Game Boy Advance there, how there's just some distance there. It looks better on this Midwest embedded kit than any of the other kits with the same screen. That's the only way I can put it, really. Finally, as long as you get everything set up properly, there's no real visible mods within a clear shell, aside from a little bit of soldering. There are ways around that, but that requires soldering to some vias on the front half of the board that might be a little bit difficult to get to. Maybe not. Depends on your ability and your specific motherboard revision. The other option, of course, is to solder directly to pins on the CPU, but that's not the best way to do it. I wouldn't recommend doing it that way. I mean, you can, but whatever. I ain't your mommy. Do what you're gonna do. And even if the instructions that this kit comes with aren't good enough for you, and personally I think they're very clear, but I haven't done it myself, so I can't really vouch. There are already quite a few nice guides out there, including a sponsored video from Colin of This Does Not Compute, and I'll throw a link to that. It's actually a pretty decent video, just keep in mind that he was essentially paid for that video. Now, all that being said, there are quite a few cons. First and foremost, seemingly never in stock, so good luck getting your hands on one. Your luck might be better than mine though. But beyond that, the battery life. Of all the backlit kits out there, this is probably the worst offender, and it has the worst battery life. Even on the order page, they quote 3 hours on standard cells. Now granted, I have seen some measurements of actual power usage, and you'll probably get better than that, so that's probably just a really conservative estimate. Max brightness with a flash cart and somewhat regular batteries. If you have decent batteries like Eneloop or the IKEA Ladas, you're playing off of original carts, you're not using max brightness, so on and so forth, you'll probably double that. But it's still among the worst offenders out there. But beyond the battery life itself, this kit does require some more precise trimming than some of the other kits. The other kits just require you remove this piece entirely. This one requires you have to make this specific cut in the bezel. Granted, it does provide you a paper template that you can use, and as long as you cut that out, you can probably cut out the bezel itself. It's not that difficult, but the more precise your cuts are, the better centered your screen will be. If you can't cut where the damn, your mod's gonna look like garbage. That's just the way it is. There is a 3D printable template that you can find and print out Well, it does not come with it, but on the Thingiverse you can grab it, print it, use that, and it does, I assume, make it a bit easier to cut out, but your guess is as good as mine, I suppose. Finally, there's probably something I'm neglecting to mention because I don't have one of these kits, so I don't know. There could be some glaring pros or some screen tearing or something. I don't know. I don't have one. I've been told that there's no screen issues, no tearing, no frame dropping, but sometimes some people aren't as sensitive to this stuff or they don't know what to look for. Now, I have it from somebody I trust that there's no screen tearing or frame dropping, so I'm gonna have to take his word for that because I have zero plans on actually ordering one of these kits now. With all these new kits on the horizon, I'm not gonna order the same old garbage when I can order the new hotness. However, if the price went down, maybe I'd consider buying one to pick up, check out, but I'm still leaning towards saving my money for some of these new kits, and I'll talk about the new kits in a bit. Next up, we have the McWill kit. Now, there's lots of speculation and drama regarding this kit that I'm not going to get into. I just want to throw it out there. If you're interested, maybe do some Google searching. That being said, let's talk about the pros. Like the other kits, this has the same transflective display, so has the same pros and cons as that. Decent colors, shitty blacks, but visible in sunlight. Anyway, one unique feature to this display is that it does have VGA out capabilities. Now, I haven't tested mine. I cannot tell you how good it works or how shitty it works, but what I can say is that I've heard good things from people who have tested theirs, or at least people who have used other McWill mods. They've spoken well of the VGA out. So I believe this is the only Game Boy Color kit that offers a video out option. And as far as I know, it's the only way to get video out on a Game Boy Color, period. It's not that big of a deal because there are ways to get video out on a Game Boy Advance or on an original Game Boy, but there are some Game Boy Color specific games, and I have this one right here. This is a Game Boy Color only game. It will not boot on a Game Boy Advance. Boot on a Game Boy Original, it'll give you an error, this game is meant for Game Boy Color only, and it'll give you the same error on a Game Boy Advance. The game itself requires the IR sensor, which Game Boy Advance doesn't have, nor does the original Game Boy. So yeah, if you want to play this on the big screen, that's basically the only way to do it, but I don't really know how the game works. But if it requires the IR sensor, you probably want the Game Boy in hand, not hooked up to your TV. So with this VGA out mod, it might actually be pretty cool to use that with Inside Gadget's new wireless Game Boy controller. Alex from Inside Gadgets makes these really cool wireless Game Boy accessories, so you can use your Game Boy to control your Wii or your GameCube or whatever. But he also recently made a receiver that's designed to be put into another Game Boy, so you can use the Game Boy to control the Game Boy. Now, out of context, that sounds a little bit like, well, what's the point on that? But if you have a Game Boy like this that's hooked up to your TV, you can have another Game Boy as a wireless controller to control it. I think that might be pretty cool. I might try that out sometime soon. Now, these next parts are a little bit subjective, but that's just been my experience so far. The default brightness is pretty high. Of all the transflective screen kits I have, this kit had the highest default brightness. Now, it's not adjustable, so you're stuck with it. If you hate it, tough tits. If you love it, well, then there you go. That does come with the highest power consumption, but this kit has some pretty high power consumption regardless of the brightness, but we'll get to that in a second here. Another cool thing is that there are no visible mods unless you install the VGA support. VGA support is optional. It does require a little bit of soldering, but without the VGA support, you can't really tell that you have your Backlight kit installed until you boot the Game Boy up. And finally, the kit itself, the PCB is shaped to help you center the kit within the console. Unfortunately, it didn't really work in my case. The screen itself is adhered to the PCB slightly askew. Now, I might be splitting hairs here with how close it is, and with an actual custom custom lens, you probably can't even tell, but it's just a minor nitpick. The other kits didn't have this problem, so this kit shouldn't have this problem either. Finally, let's move on to some of the downsides here. Unlike the other kits, this kit actually does require some soldering, and it's not just like you need to hook up some extra power cables. This comes with a loose surface mount crystal that you need to solder up, and there's 4 terminals on it that you need to solder, and there's 3 wires that you need to solder. I'd say it has the most complicated install, and if you saw my video, you'll know that I had a little bit of trouble trying to understand what the heck was going on. At the time, I didn't really search, but there were no install videos that I could find. But on the product page, the instructions that you're given, that's it. And I didn't like them. I had a hard time with it. In the end, I did get it working, so it wasn't that bad. It's just they're kind of hard to understand, kind of hard to follow, and I completely misunderstood at a few different points. Another thing here, and this might have just been my bad luck, but the first Game Boy Color I installed this kit into didn't work. There was this weird visual artifacting going on with the screen. It did not look good. I removed the kit, installed it in another Game Boy Color, and everything worked perfectly fine, and I haven't tested that particular Game Boy Color with another kit yet, so I don't know if it was just this kit having trouble or if it was just that Game Boy Color having trouble, but either way, I feel like it's worth mentioning just in case. Here's another thing that I noticed, and believe it or not, this is a feature. It is mentioned in the instructions. You have to boot this console up twice from a cold start. I'm not even kidding. It's just the first time you boot it, it won't turn on. That's it. You have to turn it on, turn it off, turn it on, then it works fine. It's a feature. Apparently the capacitors need to charge or some other bullshit. None of the other kits have this problem. Once the kit's on, it works fine. I mean, come on. What the heck? Which leads me to another one of the issues I found. You know how with the AliExpress kit, the complete drop-in kit, CDI, that kit has a little bit of screen tearing due to the frame rate mismatch? Frame dropping. Well, the McWill kit has the same issue. I suspect this is related to VGA out and that they kept it at 60 frames per second. I think VGA is actually a little bit more flexible in that you don't have to stick explicitly to 60 frames. I think most things will accept 59.7 just fine, but I don't know. I don't know, I'm just speculating. Either way, this kit does have some screen tearing. Not nearly as bad as that funny playing GBA display, but it is noticeable. To be fair though, I could only see it in Pokemon and only when I was running around in the overmap. When you're just walking around, you don't really notice it. So my point is, it's there, but unless you look for it and unless you're playing one specific game, you're probably not even going to notice it. And I've been playing the game already for a couple hours before I even noticed it the first time, so you might not even notice it. That's just me. Another issue with this kit is the power draw. It's not nearly as bad as the Midwest Embedded kit, but it's not that much better. It's a pretty thirsty kit, especially when you turn it on the first time. It doesn't even turn on because the capacitors need to charge. It's alright battery life. Quite frankly, as long as you're getting more than 4 hours, I think it's good enough, but there's some room for improvement, I think. My screen was crooked. The whole self-centering thing didn't really do much for me. The screen is still crooked. I ended up 3D printing some brackets based off the Freckleshack brackets, and I used those, and those did help quite a bit, but it's still a little bit crooked. Could probably hide this with a custom lens, but I don't know. One of the weird things that McWill did compared to Ben's implementation is the image itself isn't in the same location on the screen. It's actually a little bit higher up, which means that screen lenses designed for Freckleshack won't fit properly. You'll have to get your own custom screen lens. So yeah, that's kind of shitty. Every other kit so far, you could use the exact same custom lens design except for this one. So that's going to add to the expense and the effort required to get a solid install. That being said, all the pros, all the cons, I feel like the screen tearing itself, it's so minor, I almost felt like I shouldn't mention it. It is there. If you look for it, you might just find it, but depending on the game you're playing, you probably won't even notice. So another cool thing, I don't notice this a lot with the Game Boy modding community, is that McWill and the shop that I bought mine from, the dragonbox.de store, it's actually based out of Europe. I don't know, I think that's pretty cool. A lot of the Game Boy mod stores themselves are based out of the US, or you have people like Inside Gadgets or Ben who are based out of Australia. So I don't know, I just think it's cool that stuff's spreading out a little bit more. After going through all the pros and cons of this kit, I feel like it has the cons of a few different kits here, but it doesn't really have the pros to back it up. So yeah, VGA is a really cool feature on paper, but I don't really think I'll ever use it. Might use it just to test it out, shits and giggles, but like actively sit down and play my Game Boy with VGA, I don't think that'll ever happen. So maybe I'd pick up another one, maybe, but only if it was for the video out feature. If I had the specific need, I needed a Game Boy Color that can output to a different display, that's the only reason I would ever pick up another one. If I just wanted to backlight a Game Boy Color, I'd buy another kit. Next up here is my personal favorite kit, and here's why. This is the 2017 Taobao Game Boy kit. This came out well before Freckleshack was even a thing, or any of the many Freckleshack competitors. The biggest draw of this kit when it came out was that the screen image, like the display image itself, was about the same as stock. So even with AGS 101 mods or Freckleshack, the image itself is smaller. Remember I said a stock Game Boy Color is about 43 millimeters. Freckleshack and AGS were about 39 millimeters wide. This thing is about 42 millimeters. So you're only losing 1 whole millimeter, half a millimeter on each side for the width. Another thing which was pretty much unheard of at the time, no other kits did this, was you got the 4 times integer scaling. It doesn't actually increase the resolution at which the games render, so for the most part they look the same, but it did cut down on what's called the screen door effect, and I'll make another video, I'll link some more resources about this. I don't want to get into this too much because I could spend all night on this, and I don't want to. Anyway, Colin from This Does Not Compute actually did a video on this kit a little while back when they were much harder to get a hold of. There was like a listing on Taobao for like $350 for a fully assembled Game Boy Color, which at the time was a darn good price for a backlit console, especially because it had all these unique features, and then only something like double-digit numbers of them shipped, so I can't remember if it was like 20s or 50s or something, but either way it was less than 100, not that many of them shipped. So at the time it was a really cool, really unique thing to have. And of course I picked mine up like a month before Freckleshack came out, but you know, it is what it is. So let's move on to the actual features, pros, cons of this screen here. As far as the good things, this kit is super bright. This is by far the brightest kit that I have, bar none. This screen gets insanely bright. It's also an IPS display, so it has the best viewing angles of all of my Game Boys, bar none, except for the other IPS Game Boy Advance, but we'll get into that later. Of all my Game Boy Colors, it has by far the best viewing angles. Like I mentioned earlier, it has just about the same viewing area because the DPI itself is just about the same. It's a little bit smaller, so you do lose a little bit, but not enough that I think a custom lens would be required. I think it looks perfectly fine with the stock lens. Unlike the transflective displays, you get excellent black levels. I'd say of all the Game Boy Color backlight kits, this one has the best blacks. Another cool feature, if you wire it up, the brightness control has an on-screen display. It's completely unnecessary, but it's a cool little feature to have. Another thing, and I feel like I shouldn't have to mention this shouldn't be a pro, but there aren't any screen tearing or frame dropping issues. It works just like a regular Game Boy Color LCD would, except backlit. No frame dropping, no screen tearing, no nothing. It doesn't have that Pokemon Pinball white screen issue that was reported with Freckleshack. Nothing. It's just any game you can play with a Game Boy Color, you can play on this kit. It works fine. Another thing, it's self-centering, there's no brackets needed, but I mean it does require quite a bit of trimming, but we'll get to that in a second. Don't really need to do any precision cutting, no brackets are needed, so I guess it comes with everything that you need. You know, you don't have to go seek out extra templates or whatever. And finally, even though this kit is a little bit more power hungry than some of the other backlight kits, it doesn't actually stress out the Game Boy any more than a regular screen would. You do have to solder some power cables up straight to the battery, but when the kit is off, it draws zero current. When the console's off, you know, you still have batteries in, does not draw any current despite being hooked up straight to the batteries. When you switch the Game Boy on, a little bit of power feeds into one of the MOSFETs on the board that switches on the battery connection that enables all the hardware that runs the display. So yeah, like I said, it is a little bit thirsty, but you're not stressing out your console any more than you need to. So if you have a bit of a dodgy console, caps might be on their way out. Console still works fine with a regular screen, it'll work fine with this. And unfortunately, we can't talk about all the good things without mentioning some of the bad things. Personally, I think you can use this just fine with a stock lens, but if you do decide to go custom and you do want to adjust the bezel to match, you're gonna have to do your own measuring because there aren't any off-the-shelf custom lens. Well, I guess off-the-shelf and custom is a little bit oxymoronic, but you know what I'm trying to say. You can't use a Freckleshack or ElClono screen with this because the display area is actually bigger than Freckleshack and ElClono. Next up, as far as actually acquiring this kit goes, it is the second most expensive kit, with ElClono being the first most expensive. The parts for ElClono individually are a little bit cheaper, but once you've got the ribbon and you've got the display and you've got your customized shell, it gets pretty pricey pretty quickly. But this one was just pricey off the bat, a little over $100 to order, and there is still a 2-month wait list just to even get mine. Next up, even though it's an IPS display and the viewing angles are absolutely fantastic and the color quality is insane, it still doesn't reproduce colors quite properly. There's just something off about the kit. I don't know exactly what it is, and if you put it side by side with any of the other backlight kits, you'll see what I mean here. I didn't even notice until I put it side by side to compare it with another kit, but I mean, if you're looking for the most accurate display, this is probably not it. I think this is a pro in itself, but I put it here in the cons section because it's not a transflective display. You can't play this out in direct sunlight. However, the kit itself does get ridiculously bright, almost bright enough that as long as you're not bouncing sunlight off the screen into your eyes, you can still use the kit outdoors. It's still plenty visible. Granted, transflective display is going to be better, but this kit is not unusable unlike the AGS 101 based kits are, in my opinion. This kit does require quite a bit of cutting to install, like you have to trim up the IR window, and I had to use my Dremel for that. I suppose if you have a file set, you can use that to clean it up, but otherwise you need one or the other, either a Dremel or a set of files to clean up the D-pad housing. There's just quite a bit of trimming involved. I did make a video and I'll throw a link to that. This trimming is visible from the outside of the shell. Personally, I think the kit itself is visually interesting, so in a clear shell it still looks pretty good, but it's still a very tight fit and it does require a lot of trimming. Not nearly as much as the AGS 101 installs, but it's still enough that I think it's definitely worth mentioning, and other kits don't require this much trimming, so there you have it. Battery life. On max brightness, this thing is a hog. When I first measured it, it just maxed out my meter. I couldn't even get some measurements. I've since measured it again, and it's still just as thirsty as I thought it was. In fact, on max brightness, it's about Midwest embedded levels there, so you're probably only going to get like 3 or 4 hours. But I think it's still worth it. It's just such a good looking kit. Alright. So, despite all that, I feel like there's still a few more things I should mention that aren't necessarily pros or cons. They're still worth knowing. So, first up is that because of the shape of this kit and how it centers in the shell, it's not going to fit with the aluminum shells. If you want an aluminum Game Boy Color, you can't use this kit. Maybe with enough elbow grease and milling, you can get it to fit, but you're not going to have a good time. And yeah, I did already mention this, but I feel like it's worth mentioning again. The wait list on this kit was insane. Seriously, 2 months from when I ordered it to when I had it in my hands. That is the longest I've ever had to wait for something that wasn't like a group buy or something. And yeah, I already mentioned this too, but colors, they're not bad, but it is different than other kits. I'd say this is one of the least accurate displays of all the kits, but because the viewing angles are still so good, because the screen itself still looks so good, it's still one of my favorite kits. I really like this kit. Maybe I'm a little bit biased about it, but I think that should speak for itself. You know, if I'm this biased about the kit that I bought out of my own pocket, maybe there's something to that. Last, but certainly not least, the famous Freckleshack. I mentioned that if you want to backlight your first Game Boy Color, this is the kit to buy, and I stand by that decision. This kit gives you the most bang for your buck. Pros. Like nearly all the other backlit displays, it does have that transflective display, which has the same set of pros and cons there. Decent colors, shitty blacks, sunlight viewing, etc., etc. Unlike a lot of the other kits, there's zero soldering required unless you want brightness control. We'll circle back to brightness control in a second, but assuming you don't want it, no soldering required, you just have to make a few little cuts, drop it in. Of all of the options out there for backlight kits, Freckleshack has the best battery life, bar none. That's it. Unless you have a stock Game Boy Color, this is the way to go for maximum battery. I feel like this shouldn't be a pro, but there are 0 frame rate issues with this. There's no screen tearing, no frame dropping. There was an issue with early batches, but I'll circle back to that in a second here. Unlike the other kits, this kit has super solid support. You have an issue or you have a question, you email Ben. He'll probably get back to you within a couple minutes, assuming it's not night down under, and he'll help you out. Of all the kits, this one has the best support by far. Even though the kit itself, when you install it, it's not self-centering, it does come with the brackets to center it. It also comes with a custom label, which this shouldn't really be a feature, I guess, because the other kits could come with a custom label, or, you know, maybe you don't want the custom label. I don't know, I feel like it's more of a bribe. It's still cool. I still like it. Thank you, Ben. So, that being said, there are a few cons here. Surprisingly, though, this is the shortest list of all my mods here. The biggest con, I think, is that the kit itself is only available in batches. This means you're getting together with a bunch of other people and basically pre-ordering the hardware. Once Ben has a set number of orders, he places the order, gets the kits, assembles, tests, ships them. That means you order today, you might get it in a week, or you might get it in a few months. Depends. There's no real way of knowing unless you're ordering near the end, or, once one of the batches is almost full. This seems to be a common theme with Ben's products, but I guess it is just the way it is. Shipping can be pricey. He recently set up a US warehouse, so those of us in the US might get a little bit of a break on that, but I can't vouch. I haven't ordered since. I just know that last time I did order, it was $20 flat rate, regardless of what you're ordering. And it's Ben. He's a hobbyist. He usually only has one thing in stock at a time, so if you want to buy multiple things to save on shipping, you can if you get lucky and they're all in stock at the same time, but chances are they won't be. Finally, my last issue with this mod is that it was pitched as a drop-in mod. By the time it finally shipped, it was mentioned that it's not quite drop-in. You actually do have to make some mods to your Game Boy, and you do some cutting of the shell. The cutting is pretty minor. It's all invisible from the outside in a clear shell. It's all underneath the screen lens. But still, drop-in and trimming to fit aren't the same thing. They're mutually exclusive options there. So I think you got to lose some points there, Ben. Because the PCB is a little bit longer than initially anticipated, you do also have to trim and insulate those cart reader pins, which I suppose that's not that big of a deal since you have to do that on most of the other mods too, or at least that's kind of a standard thing to do on Backlight mods. But when you sell people on the idea of a drop-in screen and then it's not actually drop-in, you lose some points there. Finally, let's bring it all together with some parting thoughts. There is a clone of Freckleshack. I couldn't find it. I think it's been taken down. Per Ben, it's been taken down, but it's still probably out there just under a different name. However, instead of that famous Ben build quality, you get that infamous China build quality, and you don't even get the support from Ben. So if you do find it, it's probably worth going with the legit version over the clone instead anyway. If it's a batch 1 clone, it's also going to have some other issues that the current shipping kits don't have, which leads me to my next point here. Batch 1. Everything that can go wrong did go wrong. I don't know specifically what happened, why all these issues decided to pop up, but Ben did not have a good time with it. So I just want to point out that when you pre-order stuff like this, when you pre-order hardware, this is a risk you have to take. Sometimes stuff comes out pretty damn nice, sometimes not so much. People had similar issues with that Funny Playing IPS display. A bunch of people pre-ordered it, and then news dropped that there might be some frame tearing, and oh my goodness, the backlash. Come on, people. This is why you don't pre-order. If you're afraid that there might be a defect with the product, wait till someone else wastes their money on it and tells you what they think of it. So, let's talk about some of the issues that Batch 1 had. These issues are not present in the currently shipping models. These are only with the Batch 1 hardware, and even then, most of those units have been replaced for non-faulty units. So, first issue, the capacitors on the board itself, between the prototype units and then the actual production units, apparently the factory decided to use different spec capacitors, which are a little bit taller. Turns out, when you use taller capacitors on a board that's designed with space constraints, they short on stuff. So a lot of people were having some shorting issues until Ben said, hey, you need to insulate this, and this. Then the shorting issues went away, but the cases then clamped together a little bit tight, and some other people had some issues with that. Next up, infamous pinball white screen issue. So let's talk a little bit about the background of this issue. In the process of drawing an image to the screen itself, the video chip in the Game Boy Color goes pixel by pixel, line by line until you have a full frame. Some game developers decided to take a shortcut to try and decrease latency. Instead of finishing the current frame, if you really need to update the frame and you need to do it right now, instead of finishing the current frame, they'll cut it off at whatever the hell line it's at, blank the display and start writing a new screen, or a new frame, excuse me. This was actually actively discouraged by Nintendo to the devs. Of course, plenty of devs ignored that, and Freckleshack does not handle this screen blanking and frame interrupting very gracefully. The newer batches handle it significantly better, hands down, night and day difference than batch 1. What batch 1 does, when you lose a frame, the whole kit resets. The original screen or any of the other kits will just start with the new screen as is expected of the original hardware, but because batch 1 Freckleshack is just resetting, you're actually losing frames. You're losing anywhere from like 5 to 20 frames, which that doesn't sound like a lot. That's a fraction of a second, but let's say you're playing Pokemon Pinball, which is a game heavily affected by this issue. The ball can go from the top screen down past the flippers in the time it takes for Freckleshack to reset. You could lose the game based on this bug. It's literally game breaking. However, I think this issue is a little bit overblown, because out of all 1,000 something games that are available for Game Boy Color, this is the only game that is actually broken by this bug. Sure, there are other games that are also affected by it, but every single other one of those instances is during a screen transition. So when the screen is changing, like going from a cutscene to a menu or something like that, none of them are game breaking. 2 instances I can think of and name offhand. First one, when you encounter a wild Pokemon in, I think it's like Pokemon Yellow or something like that, when the battle animation comes up and it switches from the overworld to the battle screen, you'll get a blank that way. But it's a turn-based game. Unless you lost like 5 whole seconds of gameplay, it doesn't affect anything except the animation itself. Another issue, the cutscene in the beginning of Link's Awakening will trigger a white screen, so you'll lose like half a second of the cutscene. That's it. I mean, there's stuff like that in a bunch of other games. Most games are entirely unaffected. Pokemon Pinball is the only game that actually breaks from this effect. Personally, I have a kit that's affected by this. I don't think it's worth replacing. This is the only game that gets broken by this effect. I could just as easily have never even played this game on this Game Boy Color and never even noticed this bug. The only reason I'm talking about it is because one person noticed, a bunch of other people corroborated that, and it just led into this nasty PR shitstorm. So, batch 1 had these nasty issues with the capacitor shorting and the Pokemon Pinball white screen issue, as it were. But these issues have been completely resolved in the new kits, and Ben even offered to replace the affected kits for those of us that did pre-order, even though we pre-ordered knowing these risks. Another issue, and I do have to admit, I don't know if it's just because this mod itself is a little bit more popular and there's more people reporting it, but this issue is not specifically fixed with the newer versions because it's not exactly an issue with the kit. There are certain instructions that you have to follow. When you expect to drop in kit, you don't have to expect to mod the console. But if you do not follow these specific instructions, which is cutting those cart reader pins as absolutely flush as possible, when you screw together your console, could cause irreversible damage to the kit. Now that means you're out the 60 or 80 bucks or whatever the hell it cost you, and there's no real way about it. If you follow the instructions though, it does work fine. I just wanted to point out that there really haven't been any other issues with the other kits where if you don't follow the instructions, it actually damages the kit. More often than not, it just doesn't work. You take it apart, do it right, put it together, it still works fine. Whereas this kit, you put it together wrong, you don't know until you go to fire it up, you start getting display issues. That's it, your kit's done. Kind of shitty, but again, if you follow the instructions, it will work fine. So, that being said, I still think Freckleshack is the best buy for your money. If you want to backlight a Game Boy Color, this is your first Game Boy Color, you really want to backlit Game Boy Color, there's no talking you out of it, you're building. That's just the way it is. Get a Freckleshack. Don't get any of the other kits, get Freckleshack. This is the best kit for your money. However, if you watch this video and you think that some of those cons are a little bit hard to deal with, like, screen size or something like that, there are some more kits coming. To my knowledge, there are 3 more kits coming up. I don't know how soon they are, but I'm under the impression that one of them is any day now, and the other ones are eventually, maybe this year, next year, something like that. But the first one, if you look at that post on Facebook from Nick Chen on the Retro Future community, he talks about another kit that someone else is working on. And there aren't a whole lot of details, but he says, and I quote, "You can wait for a better version. This is another version by a Chinese developer. The screen size is the same as the original screen." And then there's just an image of the kit itself, and you know, it does look the same size as the original screen. Well, actually, it looks more like my 2017 Taobao kit, but he also has a picture of the bare LCD itself, which is definitely not the Taobao kit. In fact, it looks a little bit more like Freckleshack, but slightly bigger, so I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. There's no more details that I can find about that kit. Now, if you take the diagonal measurement of a Game Boy Color screen, the original screen is about 2.4 inches. This kit Nick mentioned is also about 2.4 inches, so it should be about the same size. However, there's another kit that Ben did an unofficial poll about. There were lots of opinions on both sides, so he never said he's going to make one anyway. We'll just have to wait and find out. But he proposed a 2.6 inch Freckleshack kit. So this is going to have the same linear scaling as the original Freckleshack, except instead of 2 times, it's 3 times. So instead of 4 total pixels being equivalent to 1 original pixel, you have 9 total pixels being equivalent to 1 original pixel. So this should be even further reduction of the screen door effect, but also it's a 2.6 inch kit, which means it's going to be even bigger than the original display. It's going to be akin to his 3-inch DMG kit over the original DMG screen. Personally, I think this kit has the potential to look absolutely amazing. If he ever does make this kit and the install isn't too much of a chore, this would probably become my favorite kit here. But I don't really know any details. I don't know if Ben is actually going to make it, or if he's going to decide, there's not a lot of interest and it's going to be too expensive. But I don't know. We'll just have to wait and find out. And finally, one more screen from Ben. He teased this a while back, but there's not really been any word since, given he's been pretty busy with Freckleshack kits and Atari Lynx kits and working on other stuff. But he did mention he wanted to make an ammo LED drop-in backlit screen. Or I say drop-in, but like Freckleshack, it's probably not going to be very drop-in. If I recall correctly, the screen display size is going to be pretty similar to Freckleshack, so it's going to be smaller than the OEM screen, but it's still going to have that same linear scaling. OLED screens are the go-to as far as black levels go and contrast. If this kit comes out, if it's not too much of a chore to install, it is going to be, or at least it has the potential to be, the best looking kit out there. Or at least maybe it'll tie for that 2.6 inch kit, but it'll be best looking for a different reason. However, the downside, just estimates on the price alone, this will be the most expensive backlight kit, period. Probably way more expensive than the ElClono mod will be, even with a custom case counted in. It's not going to be cheap. When he originally posted the idea for this, it was like sort of a, would you guys be interested in type post. It wasn't a, hey, I'm making this, keep an eye out. So it could still happen, might not happen. We'll just have to wait and see. So anyway, guys, I know that was a long one, very content dense. I actually did try something a little bit new with this video. I hope it worked out. I guess you'll have to be the judge of that and let me know. I don't plan on doing stuff like this for every other video, and by stuff like this, I mean prep work, editing, pre-recording, stuff like that. You know, maybe for other review videos or stuff like that, but my actual mod and install videos are going to be the same format that I've been doing. But otherwise, as far as the content goes, do you agree with my assessment of these kits? Do you disagree? If you disagree, why? Let me know. Let's get some discussion going. But otherwise, I hope this video was helpful. I hope it was informative, and thanks for watching.